Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants and guests, please kindly be seated. We'll start the event. 안녕하십니까. 유엔 여성기구의 행사에 오신 여러분들을 환영합니다. 저는 유엔 여성기구 성평등센터에서 근무하고 있는 이아정 대외협력팀장입니다. 오늘 행사는 국제행사인 관계로 영어로 진행됨을 양해를 부탁드립니다. 행사 전반에 걸쳐서 저희가 동시통역을 제공하고 있습니다. 채널 1이 한국어고 채널 2가 영어입니다. 동시통역기를 사용해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, excellencies, welcome to UN Women's event, Engaging Men for Ending Gender-Based Violence, marking the first year anniversary of the UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality during 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. My name is Ahjung Lee. I'm the External Relations Specialist from the center. It's my privilege and honor to serve you as the MC for the event. We will provide the simultaneous translation services throughout the event. Channel 1 is Korean and Channel 2 is English. Today in this room, we have distinguished participants, almost 200 people, including 15 ambassadors from Chile, Canada, Brazil, Australia, Kuwait, Sudan, Germany, Portugal, Uruguay, Slovenia, Ireland, Argentina, South Africa, and New Zealand. Thank you very much, Excellencies. We have over 50 diplomats joining from 37 countries. We have military officials from Korea as well as from other countries, including from the Ministry of National Defense and the PKO Center of the Republic of Korea. We have the officials and directors from various government agencies and international organizations. We have leaders and practitioners from the private sector, academia, as well as research and training institutes, including Human Rights Institute of Korea, KIJEP, the Korean Institute for Gender Equality Promotion and Education, and KWDI, Korea Women's Development Institute. And last but not least, we have 20 guests, distinguished delegates from Vietnam as well. So we have very, very great group of participants today, and we sincerely thank you for your time and participation. Now, without further ado, we'd like to show you a very short video by our UN Women Goodwill Ambassador, actress Nicole Kidman, entitled Play Your Role in Ending Violence Against Women, which will help to set the tone of this event.
As we all know, our world has changed. Over the past few months, we've seen deep inequalities surface, but we've also seen opportunities to build and change things for the better. One of the lessons we've learnt from the pandemic is that the home is not a safe place for so many women and so many girls who are subject to domestic violence. But as many countries open up after COVID-19, we do have a chance to create a new normal, a future without violence against women. Even before the pandemic, the numbers were staggering. 1 in 3 women would face gender-based violence in her lifetime. 1 in 3. As UN Women's Goodwill Ambassador, I have traveled the world and I've had a chance to hear from many survivors of violence. Their stories have been excruciatingly painful at times, heartbreaking, and horrifying. But the women themselves would remind us and me that this is a problem with a solution. But the solution can only exist if we provide help. So that's what I'm doing today. I am trying to create awareness and build more awareness. UN Women works at many different levels to prevent and address violence against women. They support organizations that provide survivors essential services. Services such as shelter, healthcare, access to justice, access to care, and access to the law. They also work to accelerate legal reforms, which is so needed. And we are always working to increase the awareness on this issue. And that's what we're asking you to do. So, to play your role in ending violence against women, we need you to learn about the issue, make your friends and your community aware of services and resources, ensure that you know who to call if someone was in danger, volunteer your time if you can, or if you have the means, donate. Donate at unwomen.org. So thank you for listening to me today, and anything you can do to help is greatly appreciated by all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to invite Ms. Jeongshim Lee, the director of the UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality in the Republic of Korea, to kindly give her welcoming remarks.
Excellencies and distinguished guests, I would like to express my gratitude to all the participants who have made time in their busy schedule to attend today's event. I would like to extend my appreciation particularly to Her Excellency Hyunsook Kim, Minister of Gender Equality and Family in the Republic of Korea, Dr. Eun Mee Kim, President of Ewha Womans University, and Alia El-Yassir, UN Women's Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific, who have most kindly come to show genuine support for our center. I also want to thank ambassadors who have generously come to reflect on the importance of ending violence against women and girls, and to support the work of advancing gender equality and the empowerment of women around the world. Excellencies, your role is extremely vital in terms of making the gender issues more visible. In 2022, with the support of the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, the UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality was established here in Seoul. The center serves as a knowledge hub to facilitate research, education, and training, the sharing of innovations, and the development of multi-stakeholder partnerships. Today, we are celebrating the first anniversary of the center's establishment, and this is why today's event is all the more significant for us. Ladies and gentlemen, despite remarkable socio-economic development, gender-based violence remains a formidable challenge across the globe. Nonetheless, we have a unique opportunity for positive changes. Today, our distinguished speaker, Dr. Gary Barker, will present compelling stories of how to engage men and boys so that we can address the root causes of gender-based violence. Our center is committed to creating a platform like this in the future in terms of identifying blind spots, highlighting women's contributions, and make their voice heard. And I invite all of you to join these collective efforts to discuss effective ways to build partnerships and change our society for the better, for both women and men. In closing, I would like to extend my warm welcome to the Vietnamese delegation, and I invite all of you to remain engaged with us until our networking reception. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jeongshim Lee. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this event has been made possible through the generous support from the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family of the Republic of Korea, and it's my absolute privilege and honor to introduce you to Her Excellency Kim Hyunsook, the Minister of Gender Equality and Family of the Republic of Korea, to kindly give her opening remarks.
안녕하세요. 여성가족부 장관 김현숙입니다. 많은 외국분들도 계시는데 저는 한국말로 하겠습니다. UN 여성기구 성평등센터 개소 1주년을 진심으로 축하드립니다. 이를 기념하여 뜻깊은 자리를 마련해 주신 이정심 성평등센터장님과 참석해 주신 기분 여러분께도 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 대한민국은 UN 여성기구 출범 이후 2012년 집행이사회 의장, 2018년 부의장을 수임하는 등 유엔 여성기구와 긴밀한 협력 관계를 맺고 있습니다. 또한 여성가족부는 여성가족부 유엔 여성기구 간 업무 협약을 토대로 지금까지 총 5,500만 불의 기여금을 지원하였으며 유엔 여성기구 운영 및 여성폭력 방지, 여성의 경제적 역량 강화 및 여성, 평화, 안보 등 관련 사업을 지원하고 있습니다. 지난해 8월 대한민국 서울에 아시아 최초로 유엔 여성기구 전문센터인 성평등센터를 설립하며 두 기관 간의 연대와 협력은 더욱 공고해졌습니다. 개소 이후 양질의 교육훈련, 연구, 국내 협력 사업 등을 실시하며 성평등센터는 명실공히 아태 지역의 양성평등 의제를 선도하는 허브기관으로 자리매김하고 있습니다. 2024년에는 성평등센터와의 협력을 강화하여 여성폭력 근절, 양성평등 직장문화 확산 등을 통해 양성평등 정책을 강화해 나가겠습니다. 11월 25일은 유엔이 제정한 세계 여성폭력 추방의 날입니다. 여성가족부에서도 2019년 여성폭력 방지 기본법 시행을 계기로 여성폭력 추방 주간을 운영하며 올해 4번째 기념식을 실시하였습니다. 대한민국 정부는 함께 잘 사는 국민의 나라를 국정 비전으로 삼고 여성폭력 근절을 위해 권력형 성범죄, 디지털 성범죄, 가정폭력, 교제폭력, 스토킹 범죄 등 5대 폭력 피해자 보호 지원을 국정과제로 채택하여 이를 이행하기 위해 노력하고 있습니다. 올해 7월 스토킹 방지법을 시행하고 스토킹 범죄에 대한 반의사 불벌죄를 폐지하였습니다. 또한 권력형 성범죄 대응을 위해 지난 4월 성폭력 방지법을 개정하여 재발방지 대책 제출기간 단축 및 의무 위반 시 제재 조치를 도입하는 등 신종 범죄 대응과 피해자 중심의 지원 체계를 강화하고자 법과 제도를 개선하였습니다. 한편 여성가족부는 피해자를 한층 더 두텁게 보호하기 위해 여성 긴급전화 1366 센터에 두는 통합 솔루션 지원단을 내년 5개 권역으로 확대하여 스토킹을 동반한 교제폭력 등 복합 피해자에 대한 원스톱 맞춤형 서비스를 강화하고자 합니다. 스토킹 피해자의 주거 지원 및 치료 회복 서비스를 17개 시도로 확대 운영하고 온라인 그루밍에 의한 아동 청소년 대상 성착취 피해 예방을 위해 상담 신고 지원 체계를 마련할 계획입니다. 올해 여성폭력 추방주간의 슬로건은 함께 만드는 여성폭력 없는 안전한 일상입니다. 안전한 일상을 만들기 위해서는 무엇보다 사회 구성원 모두가 주변에 관심을 기울이고 폭력에 대한 감수성을 높이는 것이 우선되어야 할 것입니다. 여성가족부도 국민의 안전한 삶을 보장하기 위해 관계 부처뿐만 아니라 시민사회, 국제사회와 협력하여 폭력에 단호히 대처하고 피해자를 빈틈없이 보호하도록 노력하겠습니다. 다시 한번 성평등센터의 1주년을 축하드리며 성평등센터가 여성폭력 근절을 포함해 아시아 태평양 지역의 특성을 고려한 양성평등 의제를 이끌어가는 기관으로 발돋움하도록 지원하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Minister Kim. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Eun Mee Kim, who is the president of Ewha Womans University, to kindly give her congratulatory remarks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and participants. Welcome to the first anniversary of the UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality. My name is Eun Mee Kim, and I'm the president of Ewha Womans University. It is my distinct honor and privilege to congratulate the first anniversary of the UN Women's Center of Excellence for Gender Equality during the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. I would like to extend my gratitude to Her Excellency Minister Hyunsook Kim of the Minister of Gender Equality and Family for her leadership and contributions toward gender equality in the Republic of Korea. I would like to also thank Ms. Alia El-Yassir, Regional Director of UN Women Asia and the Pacific, for the regional efforts in raising awareness and eliminating violence against women and girls under the Unite campaign. I would like to extend my congratulations to Director Jeongshim Lee of the UN Women's Center of Excellence for her achievements over the past year in advancing gender equality and empowering women. although a short time, a lot of achievements. Congratulations. It is very meaningful that you have invited President Gary Barker of Equimundo Center for Masculinities and Social Justice to deliver a special lecture on the importance of engaging men and boys to end gender-based violence, since it is critical that women, girls, men, and boys all work together to end gender-based violence. Ewha Womans University, where I work, has a long history of promoting gender equality and women's empowerment through women's education and producing outstanding women leaders in our 137-year history. However, I find it sobering that it will take another 131 years to reach gender equality in the world, according to the 2023 Global Gender Gap Report published by the World Economic Forum. According to the 2023 report, South Korea ranked 105th out of 146 countries, although its economic prowess puts it among the top 10 nations in the world. Gender-based violence include cyber-based violence in the era of digital transformation of the fourth industrial revolution. And thus we must work against all forms of gender-based violence. A prosperous nation and a democratic nation, unfortunately, do not guarantee a nation of gender equality, nor a nation without gender-based violence. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, we must all work together for gender equality, gender empowerment, and toward ending gender-based violence in all forms. We have gathered here representing various sectors of our societies, including politics, government, academia, international organizations, civil society, as well as individual citizens, to discuss and create feasible and implementable pathways for gender equality. Violence against women and girls affects not only their physical and mental health, but also their well-being at all stages of life and career. As the global theme of this year's 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence is Unite, invest to prevent violence against women and girls, we should call on governments and citizens for urgent and strategic investments to tackle the root causes of gender-based violence. I hope that today's discussions would shed light on what we can do together to prevent violence against women and girls, empower women and girls to stand up against violence, and reaffirm our commitment for international cooperation and action. It is my honor and privilege to deliver this congratulatory remarks. I look forward to continuing our ongoing dialogue and working closely together on gender equality and ending gender-based violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Eun Mee Kim. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege and honor to introduce you to Ms. Alia El-Yassir, the Regional Director for UN Women for the Asia and the Pacific region. She traveled from Thailand, where our regional office is located, for this occasion, and we are very honored to have her with us today to deliver the keynote speech.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, and dear partners, it really is an honor and a great pleasure for me to be here today at this event that is on engaging with men for ending gender-based violence, which is organized by the UN Women's Center for Excellence for Gender Equality. I want to thank Jeongshim and the whole team for inviting me to speak on this important topic, particularly on the special occasion of the one-year anniversary of the Center of Excellence. And I also want to note that we are, yes, commemorating the 16 days of activism. But this is work that we do 365 days a year. And I'm grateful for Her Excellency Hyunsook Kim, Minister for Gender Equality and Family, for supporting the work of UN Women in Korea, but more broadly. And I want to also thank Dr. Eun Mee Kim, President of Ewha Womans University, who has graciously accepted the appointment as UN Women's Goodwill Ambassador for the Republic of Korea. Thank you so much for taking on this important role, and please join me in congratulating her. I want to thank all of the partners who have shown up here today from Korea, but I also want to recognize the delegation that joins us from Vietnam, and welcome to my colleague Caroline, to the government representatives and the representatives from Vietnam Airlines. I'd like to believe that we're all here today at this event because we are committed to eliminating the global pandemic of violence against women and girls. And as has already been mentioned, this year's 16 Days campaign is focused on the need for investment in the work to stop violence. And we want to stop it before it even starts. And this is really hard work, and it takes all of us to make this happen. But we really do need those investments. This is not the time to roll back from what we have been doing. This is my first, but hopefully not last, visit to the Republic of Korea. And I have to say, I'm really, truly inspired by the country's efforts to advance gender equality and women's empowerment, not only here in Korea, but across the Asia-Pacific region and around the world, also through its international development cooperation policies. As UN Women, we stand ready to continue our partnership with the people and the institutions of the Republic of Korea. We are halfway to the cutoff point of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development, and unfortunately, we are off course. According to UN Women estimates, if we look at the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, actually the estimates are that it's going to take us almost 300 years to close the global gender gaps. That is way too long, and there's no way that we're going to meet the 2030 target. Violence against women and girls is the most prevalent and pervasive human rights violation in the world, and no country is immune. Despite the fact that many countries have passed laws to combat violence against women, the enforcement of those laws remains weak. And we know that pervasive discriminatory social norms remain as significant obstacles. When we say 1 in 3 women, we're talking about an estimated 736 million women. That's the 1 in 3 who are subjected to some form of gender-based violence at least once in their lifetime. Violence against women and girls can and must end. And we know what is needed. We know that we need a comprehensive, costed and budgeted approach that addresses legislation, the production and use of data to drive policies, but also to have effective monitoring of those policies and the programs that we're investing in. We have to ensure access to services and access to justice for the survivors of violence. And very importantly, and this is what we're here to discuss today, is really prevention. How do we work more effectively on preventing this, stopping it before it starts? And when we speak about prevention, there has already been some investment over the past few decades, and I think all of us are aware of the awareness campaigns. We have raised awareness about the phenomenon. And I would say we've even changed attitudes. If I think about my own lifetime, when the Me Too movement came about, it resonated with me because it changed a norm. Something that I had grown up with that seemed normal was no longer accepted. So we can change what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. But I think even though we can increase awareness, shift attitudes, the really tricky part is about changing behaviors. And when we tackle behavior change, engagement of men and boys is not only helpful or a good thing to have, it's actually indispensable. And we are all in for a treat today because we have Dr. Gary Barker, who is President and CEO of Equimundo, as the main speaker for today's event. He is one of the most compelling speakers I've had the pleasure to listen to, and I look forward to your lecture today. He is one of the leading authorities on male allyship for promoting gender equality, but also very importantly, healthy masculinities that place value on compassion and courage to stand up to all forms of injustice. There's a Korean proverb that says, if you lift it together, it's better, even if it's a sheet of paper. So together, as advocates working for gender equality, by engaging men and boys, we can light a spark that can dismantle the structures that perpetuate violence and discrimination. Distinguished guests, the Asia-Pacific region accounts for 60% of the world's population. That's a critical mass of humanity that we can work with. And so now we stand at a crossroads, and we have to choose the path that will change the course of history. So let us embed the values of empathy and equality into the fabric of societies across the region. Let us redefine masculinity, not as a form of dominance, but as a source of support and solidarity. Engaging men and boys is not just beneficial, it's crucial. We must acknowledge that men and boys too are a part of the fabric of communities. We have to transform bystanders into allies, aggressors into advocates. That's how we shift from reactive condemnation into proactive prevention of violence against women and girls. Together, we can stop the cycles of abuse and inequality. And in closing, I would like to sincerely thank the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family for its generous support to UN Women and to the Center of Excellence that has made this event and this conversation possible. And I want to affirm UN Women's commitment to continue in our partnership together with the ministry and with all partners to end gender-based violence. I thank you. Kamsahamnida.
Thank you so much for this inspiring speech. Thank you very much. Now, distinguished guests, we are going to have an occasion of taking photo. If you are familiar with the Korean culture, the first year's birthday is very important occasion. We all know, right? So please allow us to have this family photo to mark the first year anniversary of our center. So please allow us, and Zoe will facilitate how to take the photo.
So I'll say end, and you will say violence. And then we'll take a shoot. And thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for this photo. I know it's quite a bit of work to take the group photo, and thank you very much for your kind patience. Now we are going to move to the special lecture and discussion time. We are very privileged today to have Dr. Gary Barker, the president and CEO of the co-founder of Equimundo Center for Masculinities and Social Justice. I'd like to invite you to kindly read his bio. He spent his entire life really to this agenda of how to really bring about men as the allies and to promote men's involvement as caregivers. And then he has also co-created the International Men and Gender Equality Survey, which is the largest survey of men's attitudes and behaviors related to violence, fatherhood, and gender equality. He also leads Equimundo's State of the World's Fathers Reports, which has become a major advocacy platform for the global care economy. And if you can kindly look at the page 4 of our brochure, you can also download through the QR code his latest research on the State of the World's Fathers 2023, centering care in a world in crisis. So I really invite you to kindly take a look at his report that is provided in our brochure on page number 4.
بس ما كان في عنف أولها.
Comienza primero por un grito, después por una cachetada.
طب أنا اليوم قدام بنتي الكبيرة أكلت هذا البوكس.
Era como que yo era de su propiedad.
Ina son ka yin haka abokanan babana.
Liedjes in het partijspel, je te spetoyen door het die.
Ni ta kuwa ri wa aji na musuna tai. ওনারা নেয়নি, আমি যখন বলছি পরে বলছে তুমি বাসায় চলে যাও, এই কেস নেওয়া হবে না।
Y yo me sentía nada. Yo me sentía la nada misma. هو الإنسان ما خصوش يتعرض للعنف يبقى ساكت كي البكمة.
Zona duhet denoncuar që në fillim.
ما حط الله المخزن في البلاد إلا باش بنادم يتربى، ذلك ويلا الضعيف.
Mi žene smo jake. Stvarno smo sposobne za sve.
Yo estoy viva de milagro acá.
So in order to address, thank you. So in order to address the violence, now how can we do, what can we do to tackle the root causes? That's the topic that Dr. Gary Barker will address. So now I'd like to invite Dr. Gary Barker to kindly come forward and to give us his special lecture.
And thank you for the invitation. Wanted to greet Your Excellencies, ambassadors, and particularly the women from Korea who have led this cause. Your bravery and your perseverance in the face of lots of ongoing inequality in Korea are known around the world. So when UN Women colleagues invited me to speak, I said I would be honored to get the chance to share with many of the women who we have been empowered and inspired by your leadership. My cause is engaging men to be part of the gender equality movement and to achieve healthier ideas about what it means to be men. And so I entitled the talk talking about manhood. I often get asked, and so I'll start with that, why does a male-identified person, a man, start to be in a career or decide to be in a career working on questioning ideas about manhood? First answer to that is I've been inspired by empowered, powerful, brave women around the world who have made this your cause for so many years. So one is simply the moral imperative that you have made so clear. And the second is that my life has been affected by men's violence, and we are ultimately talking about men's violence against women. It is not violence that falls out of some strange place or another planet. It is violence at the hands of men. I was a witness to an act of violence in my secondary school about 4 decades back. Essentially an honor killing, a young man who killed another young man in front of us because he said the boy that he killed had stolen his girlfriend. So this vision of manhood that he had in his head, leading him to believe he had to take the life of another in front of us. It was a performed act. He wanted others to see that his manhood had been dishonored and he would try to reacquire that honor. I don't share that lightly. It was a traumatic act for lots of people's lives, but I think we need to talk about that. 2 years later, in my university residence hall on a Friday night, there is a beer, there is a party, a group of young men sexually assault a young woman. My university did nothing about it. I share those to say my life is affected by this. I started working in my career, I started working with survivors of violence in parts of Latin America, empowered and inspired by women who had devoted their career and their lives to supporting survivors. But I began asking in that work, how do we look upstream? How do we talk about what it takes to end and prevent men's use of violence against women, with the belief that it is not inherent, it is not who we are as men, that violence is made, it is learned, it is socialized, and we have to be able to figure out ways to end it and break those cycles. So I want to talk about that. I want to acknowledge how difficult this conversation is. Many of us in the room, our lives have been affected by violence. To talk about men's violence means to look at some of the most harmful things that men can do, but it also means believing that men can be better, and that while it is a minority of men in most settings who use violence against women, it is all of us as men who need to be part of the cause. So what I talk about in my lecture is, what do we know about what drives men's use of violence? What things can work to prevent it? Among those things are starting young. How do we talk to boys at young ages about what it means to be nonviolent, connected, caring, empathetic? Second, how do we look at the trauma in men's lives that is often a driver of men's violence against women, not as an excuse, but as a factor that we must understand? I'll also talk about men and caregiving, because I think that is a topic that it's a huge driver of gender inequality, and second, because I think it's an antidote. As we hold up our hand and did that end violence, we've got to talk about what comes next. What is it that we're inviting men into? We're telling men to stop something, but what is it that we're asking them to do? And I do believe that it's about care and connection, to acknowledging our interconnectedness that is really the way forward. So I'll share some reflections about how I think care and caregiving is one of those ways. I'm going to use some slides here. What is it that men have to do with gender inequality? It sounds fairly obvious, but I do think we need to center it and talk about it. I just brought up the issue of care. We just launched our Global State of the World's Fathers reports in July together with the UN Women Director, and we had another launch at UN Women headquarters in New York. The data is not encouraging. On average, women do 3 times the amount of daily care work compared to men. That is one of the single largest drivers that women's income continues to be less than men's. You know in Korea how far you have to come still on that particular issue. That means on a daily basis that women do about 2 hours more than men do if we take a global average. I don't get a lot of men who necessarily invite me for a tea after that when I bring up that piece of information, but I think it is useful and important for us as men to understand that. You know the data about men's use of violence against female partners and against women. Voice. The fact that women are less than 1 in 4 members of parliaments and congresses and national assemblies around the world continues to be an issue for men. What do we do in political parties? What do we do in political bodies? The spaces that we are taking up and what we are doing or not doing to see that such bodies are fully 50-50. And economic power. We know the huge gap globally, and you know the gap you have in Korea in terms of men's income compared to women. That is a fundamental issue of power and a voice that men need to be part of, that men need to look at and figure out what is my role. So all of these issues, it's pretty obvious that men are part of them. That's not about decentering the conversation of empowering women, but it's to say, what does allyship look like so that men can be part of this? And when we talked about this 20 years ago, and UN Women has been doing this, I know that many of you in the room has as well, we had to talk a lot about why we were engaging men. I think the moment, we've kind of stepped beyond that page, and now we're talking about how. What does that look like to engage men to be allies in this work? We have been starting our work with research, asking where are we? Where are men on this journey toward gender equality? What factors drive men's use of violence against women? What are men's own needs and realities and challenges? We've been asking as part of a global survey called the International Men and Gender Equality Survey, or IMAGES. We've carried it out now in more than 50 countries, often in partnership with UN Women, sometimes with the UN Population Fund, always carried out by local partners, and you can see across the map there numbers of waves of that survey. I won't go into, you can see there's a link there, I won't go into lots of details there, but I want to give just a few highlights of where we are. And the first highlight is, it's not very encouraging. I can start with the glass 1/3 full, which is that around the world, some 30 to 50% of men, depending on how we ask the question, attitudes or behaviors, seem to generally support gender equality, often as a vague, abstract thing. When we get closer to home about quotas, about what you would do to do the care work at home, about what you would do in your workplace to ensure that women are as likely to be in positions of power and management as you, men's support tends to drop. There's a lot of resistance still to what should be and feels to those of us in the room so self-evident of the need for a world that is fully equal between men and women. Why then so much resistance? And I feel like in Korea, I'm kind of risking mansplaining, to use that word in English, that you are living this, right, of men's resistance. We know how politicians are taking advantage of that in some parts of the world. This slide has lots of text because there's lots of things that are happening of why men seem to be pushing back. And in fact, a big finding from our International Men and Gender Equality Survey is this. Around the world, young men, the generation ages 18 to 30, are now less likely to support gender equality than their father's generation. I'll just repeat that because it's very disturbing. The younger generation of men in the world, and you see this in Korea, are less likely to believe in gender equality than the older generation. Now, I can look and be angry at those men for not getting it, or I can say, what are we doing wrong, and what do we need to do to bring men into it? One, there is a success story. Me Too, the women's rights movement around the world, has left lots of men nervous. That, to me, is a success story. Men being aware they can be held accountable is a good thing, and we should embrace that and celebrate that success. Lots of men, when they're scared about that, though, however, they become to say, no, I didn't do anything, and they begin to get layers of defensiveness, to push back against what should be a self-evident agenda. Many men in the US, in a survey we just did, tell us they think their reputation can be destroyed with a single comment. I think in listening to women, we know that it's never quite that easy in terms of holding men, particularly men in power, accountable, but lots of men are worried. Many men in this country and other countries are worried about their education prospects, about a job market that feels unstable, changes in economies that once used to promise a certain kind of job path for men, not seeming so clear anymore. In new economies that have gone from industrial to AI, a lot of men are worried. I thought if I worked and worked and worked, I would see my salary go up. I'd have a clear career path that is not so clear. Now, we have trouble in those moments to get men to see we never made those career paths for women. We need to figure out a way that we do this with you. You have those concerns, but what do we do to also bring women into that? We find in our research that men who perceive themselves economically precarious or unstable are the ones most likely to oppose full equality for women and to oppose the kinds of policies we need. So I think here's a bit of our challenge. How can we both be empathetic about some of those challenges that men face? That's a real challenge if you're worried about a career path, if you're not sure how you can have a stable income. That's an okay concern that we can support with men. But how do we also listen to that while calling them into the fact that the world is still vastly unequal for women? That, I think, is probably one of our biggest challenges at the moment. The other issue that our research finds and that we think is an important way to bring men in as allies is to acknowledge how these ideas about manhood, what we may call harmful versions of masculinity, we've sometimes called the man box. I think we sometimes in English have used this expression toxic masculinity. We stop using that phrase because it doesn't really start conversations with men. It tends to turn men rather defensive if we use that kind of contract those two words together. So instead, how do we have a conversation with men that says our lives are shaped and too often harmed by the very system that also gives us privileges? Our surveys around the world find that the more men believe in a version of manhood, that they shouldn't seek help, that violence is an okay way to get what you want, that men naturally were born to be in charge, that men shouldn't stop and ask for help, that we suffer. The more men believe in that version, that is, the more they're in this man box, the more likely they have poor health, lower life expectancy, depressive symptoms, have thought about suicide, have fewer friends, report that they're lonely, that they use violence against others, whether it's harassing, violence against a female partner, and other forms as well. So this same construct that women have been talking about for years also harms us as men, not in the same ways, it's not the same, but to get men to say, we also suffer from this. An example I will often start off with a group of young men is the life expectancy gap. Korea's gap between how long women live compared to men is 6 years. If I read your data correctly, that's pretty close to what it is around the world. We think from research that about 1 to 2 years of that is biology. The female body is a better design. We should acknowledge that. It's good for men to think about that as well. The other years are because of how we live as men, the kinds of work that we do, the amount of smoking and drinking and things we do or that we're made to do because of the kind of work that we end up in, things that are preventable, things that we also often have some agency to change. I can often get men to pay attention to that point in terms of how our lives are shaped by lots of things are part of that, but certainly some of them have to do with the ideas about manhood, the fact we don't stop and ask for help, acknowledge when we need help, seek health services when we need them. I give all those examples so we talk about ways that we bring men into this conversation. What does our data tell us as well about which men and what drives men to use violence against female partners? We know from our data, and there's lots of other studies, that apart from the context you live in, which of course shapes a huge amount, whether there's impunity or whether men are held accountable, in terms of individual men, men who witness violence growing up against their mother or another woman in the household, or themselves experience violence, mostly at the hands of other men or boys, are 3 to 4 times more likely to perpetrate violence against a female partner as adults. That finding holds up in almost every country in the world. That is not in any way an excuse, but it does help us understand how men's witnessing of violence is itself a form of trauma. It is also a making violence normal in men's lives. Because what often happens when men witness this violence as boys is that no one does anything to stop it. It is silenced, services are not available, or the response that's there does not treat it with the gravity that it needs to be treated. Boys and men internalize and learn then that violence is normal. Families ignore it, stay silent about it, or the pressure or the power that men have to maintain silence reigns. So I think it is important to think about boys and men as harmed by gender-based violence. Again, not in the same way, but if we understand that that's a traumatic experience, we look at perpetration in a different way, and our prevention has to look at men in different ways. Other factors matter, of course, as well. Do you believe that there's no repercussions of the use of that violence? Alcohol and substance use, men's stress and unemployment. Some studies have found that for every percentage, a few studies in South Asia, that for a percentage increase in men's unemployment, men's violence against women increases by up to 0.5%. Yes, that matters. Those other factors matter. But I focus on this ways that boys and men learn violence growing up, because it also helps us understand that it's preventable. It is not inherent. It's not part of who we are as biological males. We're also paying a lot of attention to the versions of manhood that our sons are streaming, looking at, watching, consuming online. We are the generation, and this is a particularly wired country, as you well know, and you're exporting lots of amazing technology and content to the world. COVID only exacerbated what was already happening, which is the amount of hours we spend on these things. Like, I realized I just brought it up here without even thinking about it, right? Our little personal devices that we can't seem to live without. Some survey work that we did in the US, it was boys ages 8 to 13 who spend the most hours watching, streaming, or on their device every day than anyone else. But we're all consuming lots of stuff online. We've been looking at some of what boys are watching on streaming or on television or on games. And it's not very encouraging, and you see that a lot in Korea as well. Of the gaming study that we carried out, virtually 80% of the content that boys and men, these were looking at ages 15 to young 20s, were streaming 8 out of 10 scenes or amounts of material they were watching was men or male-looking characters killing or harming others. It is a steady bombardment of that amount of information. Now, it's not an obvious causality of watching violent content and using violence, but we know there are associations. We are making normal the daily consumption of versions of violent manhood that become what our children, and particularly our sons, are streaming in huge amounts. We also looked at television content, the shows most watched by men and boys. The good news is lots of those shows are showing empowered women, women as likely to be in positions of leadership, being fully competent. However, the stories of men were often of men using violence, men being incompetent as caregivers, men being emotionally incompetent, and both verbally as well as physically violent. Those things happen in the real world, of course, too often, but it is disturbing if you look at how much of the content that boys watch that reinforces these harmful ideas about manhood. So that was a lot of, here's the problem we're in. We're going backwards on gender equality in terms of where young men are. We've got a lot of driving of men's use of violence, but we know something about it. And we've got a lot of time spent by boys and young men online seeing men's violence repeated and made normal all the time. How then do we step in to do some prevention? And I'm going to talk about three things. One, very specific approaches that work in terms of preventing violence. Second, I want to talk about care equality and how I see that not only as a cause in and of itself, but also connected to violence. And then also talking about how we have these conversations in more creative ways, stepping into collaborations with Hollywood and content makers, as well as thinking about how we talk even younger to boys about these issues. And I want to emphasize that our work with boys and men is together with key women's rights work. This is not putting boys and men separately over here. This is doing it in partnership with. So I'll talk about some things that work, and I'll start with what I call these three pillars. There is a growing evidence base of what can work in prevention. And so with this theme this year of the 16 days of activism around investment, I would say 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, if a minister of gender equality said, do you have some things that show effectiveness and that show that they're worth investing in on boys and men, we might not have much to show, but we have much more these days. UN Women's been gathering a lot of data. There are researchers around the world who have tested different approaches. We've done some of that as well. Here's a few things that we do know. Looking at trauma as part of our conversations with boys and men, acknowledging that breaking cycles of violence means having boys and men talk about violence they've witnessed or seen or experienced. That is not necessarily we need a therapist for every boy or man or woman or girl, but it does mean that we need to train our facilitators who do this work to be aware of how witnessing and experiencing violence is part of how most of us grow up as men and boys, and an awareness of that needs to be part of our conversations in prevention. We need to do norm change. Clearly, how acceptable violence is to men matters, and how we break that sense that it's not acceptable. In many of these, what we try to do is emphasize the positive, that in almost every setting we look at, there are more men who believe violence against women is not okay than men who believe that it is okay. However, those men who believe it is okay get too much attention from the rest of us. Most men overestimate how much their peers, their male peers, think violence against women is used. We do a lot of myth breaking, to call it that, to say actually the majority of us don't think this is okay. Why aren't we talking about it? Norm change approaches that don't just say this is bad, don't do it, it must stop, but ways that say most of us don't think it's okay. Most of us are harmed by it. How can we all be part of the solution? Combining this work with, if I mentioned before, trauma as a mental health issue, how do we combine violence prevention with alcohol reduction, for example, and with other mental health approaches that attempt to provide services to families who have experienced multiple kinds of violence? Because we often know that violence comes together with other violence, sometimes by a man against a woman, sometimes against children in the same household. How do we intervene with multiple approaches? And I'll talk about parent training as one of those. We also try to find key moments in men's lives when they seem to be open to paying attention to these conversations and talk about consent, healthy relationships, dialogue. Those are couple-based when we can do them that way. And then finally, I think offering hotlines. We have often had hotlines for women survivors, which we need. We've sometimes had hotlines for men who may be showing signs of suicide, so suicide hotlines. A few countries have been experimenting with hotlines for men who feel like, I may lose control. I feel like I might use violence. Chile has experimented with those, the city of Bogota in Colombia. Mexico has, Japan has tried these. I think these are approaches, a few European countries as well, finding moments where we can intervene before men get to a stage of using more serious forms of violence. All this is to say we've got to be more sophisticated in our prevention. It's not just the one message prevention campaign, and I think we've mentioned that before. These are important days for us to call attention to us. We do need to have the kind of force that a global UN campaign has, but how do we step into what this data tells us about the need for integrated programs that work over the life course and that use the evidence that we have developed over these years to do it? An example that we've done, and there's a lot of folks working in this space, is parent training. One, it's got the dual impact of both reducing parents' violence against children, which is often very closely related to men's violence against women, and it's a moment to engage men when they seem open to these kinds of conversations. Our recruitment in this programming, the module that we developed first in Latin America and has been used now in about 15 countries, has used prenatal visits as a moment to recruit men. In some countries, it's normal that men are included in the prenatal visit. In other countries, it may be that he's there, but he's in the waiting room. In some countries, it may be he's in the parking lot. But in most cases, he's there. And we begin to use that in a strategic way to call men in, and to also use that as a moment to recruit men to participate in parent training activities. To both get men to do this together, so it's not just one individual man being called in, but also to grab that moment when men are kind of worried. They're worried about the new human who's coming into the world. They're worried about it economically. They're often worried about what happens to the relationship. Who am I now? In some ways that men are worried in bad ways, but we step into that in the good way and say, we can get your attention. Recruiting men at moments like that, they will come to multiple session activities. We've done this in Sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Latin America. It's also been implemented in parts of South Asia and also with partners in different parts of Western Europe. In rigorous impact evaluations that we have been able to do, it makes a difference. We've measured reductions by violence against both parents against children, as well as violence by men against women, as well as nudging men, encouraging men to do more of the hands-on care work. So it does seem to be a way that we can do multiple things. We've often engaged the health sector, which is often in many countries one of the most wide-reaching ministries in terms of how often it interacts with women and men and others, and often has community health workers who can be engaged to be the facilitators. That links me to the second pillar here, which is thinking about care equity. We started in 2011 with partners around the world, and you can see some of the international NGOs who have been part of that. The Men Care campaign, with the simple idea that there was no global platform of saying, we believe men should be doing, on average, half of the global care work. In fact, if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, there's not even really a very strong goal in there about men doing half the care work. In fact, it doesn't say that we believe we'll get to a world where men would be doing half the care work. As we've found, there is no government on the planet that has put a policy goal of achieving a world where men will do 50% of the care work. Our aspirations about men in care work are ridiculously and shamefully low. So we started Men Care with that provocation, that the world gets better in terms of women's lives, children benefit when men do more of the hands-on care work, men ourselves get to live better, connected, loving lives, healthier lives if we do more of the care work, and societies where men do more of the care work also show less violence and more overall happiness. This felt to us like a really low-hanging fruit of a win-win-win. So we are now about 60 countries that participate in this, carrying out shared activism and advocacy, sharing programmatic approaches, including the parent training that I mentioned before. And we produce every 2 years a global State of the World's Fathers report to say, where are we? This year's report that we launched in July of this year is a bit of a good news, bad news. If we look across the world, we did new data in 17 countries representing all regions of the world. Men do seem to be doing more than some years past. We don't have all the countries in the world, of course, But the gap does seem to be slightly reducing. Men seem to be doing a bit more. COVID was a wake-up call for some men. Women did even more, but in many settings, men, during lockdowns, new ways of working, where remote working, et cetera, more men are in the household. Some of them are actually using that moment of being in the household to do more hands-on work. That's good news. Interestingly, there's one area where men do more care work than women do, and that is care for our bodies. That would be working out at the gym. That would be the exercise we do. That would be interesting to call men out on that one and say, you know, maybe we could get you to step off the Peloton for 15 minutes and do a bit of care work, but we care that you're in good shape. Carrying babies, doing work at home does take some energy. But that was the one area where men do more in the 17 countries we looked at, is the care for our own bodies. Not very encouraging, but it gives us a place to start. Interesting finding, an important one this year, is that caregiving brings us all happiness. Men and women say that if you're satisfied with the ways and the amount of time you care for your children and others in your household, you are closer to being the person you want to be in life. It's pretty obvious, but I think we have been underselling to men, or perhaps those of us who work on campaigns and approaches have been ignoring just how much fatherhood and care of other kinds, not just children in the household, but also elderly parents, partners, disabled family members, that it matters to men, that in fact we get life happiness out of it. And in fact, it helps us be happier, including at work. So we've gotten a few corporations interested in that conversation to say, it's not about squeezing every drop of sweat and blood out of your workers, but in fact, if they're happy with the amount of care work, the involvement they have as caregivers, and if you help them do that, they actually feel like they want to work with you longer, stay with you. They are better employees. This is one of those win-win-win that just keeps multiplying. Another finding that we think is also important to put out there is that if men take care of our emotional lives, if we acknowledge that we are vulnerable beings who need help, who when we feel lonely should seek help, who when we feel a mental health need should seek help for that, the more men are aware of that, the more they tell us they care for others. We also see the cycle working the other way. Men who report closer relationships to their children say they pay more attention to their own emotional and mental health. So it does tell us that if we care for men, men will care for others. If we step into that conversation saying, you need some help and attention, we see that it pays forward in important ways. Not automatically, but it does pay forward. We've also tried to engage men as allies in the policies that we need for care, childcare, parental leave. Men told us in the surveys that they want these policies as much as women told us they want these policies. And they also told us they would be willing to do marches and to be out there doing it. We supported setting up the first ever Dad's Caucus in the US Congress. 30 members of Congress who are all fathers, all dealing with these issues, who said on day one, as they started the caucus, we will partner with the Moms Caucus because women have been carrying the load, not only at home, but also carrying the activism load, the advocacy load, the doing the policy research on why care policies matter. We're not trying to bring men to take over that policy space. We're bringing men in to be allies who march alongside. When we bring this up a lot, when folks say, wait, men would want to do this, one of the easiest tasks we've ever done is when we set up the Men Care campaign, was asking colleagues across these 60 countries to send us pictures of real-life men doing real-life caregiving in the ways that they do it. I just put 10 of them on the slide here, but we have thousands of them. It is easy to find men around us who are doing caregiving. The issue is that most of us don't feel that we are acknowledged in the social space in the world around us for being involved caregivers. We feel that we're acknowledged when we invent something, or make our sales quota, or achieve something at university, or get promoted in a military rank, but not many of us feel that we get kudos, that we get attention for doing this. Now, I always step in with this saying, my partner is Brazilian, my wife is Brazilian, and my mother-in-law is a teacher from Brazil, and she always says, you don't get extra credit for what you should have been doing anyway. So I do feel that men, we don't really need to give men extra credit for this. We should be doing this because it's good. But I do feel that we need to ask ourselves to say, it is okay to give men some credit for this, because otherwise the men who achieve things in other ways get lots of credit, and we don't bring this up enough. We need to help men see how much care and caregiving is part of and should be part of our identities. And our third pillar is, how do we start younger? We've been working with partners in a number of countries with a new initiative that we're calling the Global Boyhood Initiative to say, how do we start these conversations with boys at even younger ages? How do we make normal conversations about consent, about healthy manhood, about caregiving? The issue that I just brought up about care, we know that it doesn't just happen in adults. If we look at surveys that we've done and others, boys are required, encouraged to do far less care in their homes than their sisters are. And then we expect when you become a father that suddenly, because it's the right thing to do, you should step in and do it. We've got to prepare boys and men to know how to do it, to see it as normal from early on. Lots of parents around the world are worried about their sons these days, their economic prospects. We know from new data from UNESCO that things have shifted in terms of boys and girls' education. In 100 countries around the world, boys are now faring worse in education than girls are, in terms of both, are they on the grade they should be on, standardized tests, and how many complete secondary school and how many complete university. We need to step into that and take that as a moment to talk about what's happening in school. The reasons for that are multiple and they're complex, but at least part of them has to do with the version of manhood that we're raising boys into. That we teach individual accomplishment, not going it as a group. That we teach, I can do it all by myself, not how do I inspire a group and be part of a group and learn in relation to others. There's a lot of things around manhood that are part of that, what's happening to boys in schools. And the ideas about gender and the gender inequalities that girls have been faced are very much related to those same versions of manhood that we're teaching boys in school that lead to bullying between boys, as well as boys' harassment of girls. I think that gives us a moment to step in and say, what do we need to do in schools to start early on conversations about gender equality and about healthy boyhood? So where do we go from here? If I'm just to, sort of sum this up, if you give me one slide to say, these are the things that I think we need to move on. One is, we've got to step into intentional conversations about manhood. That is, it won't happen. Boys will not come up to us and say, tell me about hegemonic ideas of manhood and what I can do to change them. We have got to step into conversations with boys about what it means. What does healthy manhood look like? That boys pretty much can tell, right? Boys have a lot of gut feelings about it. Girls have a huge number of ideas about it as well. But we need to make those part of intentional conversations in school, after school, with parents. We need content creators talking about it, that they're aware of how am I reinforcing or perhaps promoting some good reflections on this. Parent training, I talked about engaging parents. I think engaging male caregivers is a key way forward. It both gives us something to say we want you to do, not just something we want you to stop doing. Here is something you can do that helps shape and drive gender equality into the future. Our images data, and I saved this point until now, one of the things that we saw is which women in the world are most likely to believe that they deserve full equality in the world is women who say they saw their mothers working outside the home, right? Women's economic participation is necessary for so many reasons, but it definitely influences their daughters. The other factor that drove girls to believe they get to be full equal humans, if their fathers did some care work, a reasonable amount of care work in the home, seeing caring fathers was another huge driver. And for sons, the same two factors applied. If you saw your father do caregiving activities and you saw your mother in the workforce, you were more likely to believe in gender equality. Those simple acts as parents, right? That equation seems so obvious, but I think we need to reinforce it. I brought up the point of men's emotional self-care as a pathway both to care for myself, but also preparing me. and saying that we expect of me my care of others. We need national policies on this. Of course, we need to do all the things to make sure that our laws are working, but we also need adequate parental leave. We need to put that at a salary level or a wage replacement level that men will feel like they can take it. We need campaigns that go along with that. We need to mandate in schools that these conversations happen, not just maybe someday some teachers will get around to it. We need national curricular standards of how to do this. We need to build into policies, and that's what investment is about this year with the 16 days, to put resources there. Those national plans need to be resourced. And ultimately, I would say we need to combine these two things that often don't go together, which is what we have been calling compassionate accountability. We do need to hold some men who use violence accountable for their harms. We need to hold all of us as men accountable for the power, this invisible power that we get that we don't think about, that we need to be held accountable for that. But we need to do that with deep compassion. And I think that part has been tough for us. We kind of too often say, well, all men hold this power out there. You all get the same amount of benefit from patriarchy, and therefore we don't want to talk about you. But I think we see that if we don't listen to how men are doing, it comes back to bite us, to haunt us, and to the resistance and backlash that we're seeing. We are not giving political ground up when we do that. We're stepping in with the compassion that we need men to show to others. So we've been using that expression, compassion and accountability. And I just like to end with a picture like this. I've talked a lot about violence. I've talked a lot about the harm that some men can do. I think it is important just to sort of imagine a 3-year-old boy someplace on the planet. We are not born into the world to be violent, to dominate others, to cause harm. We come into the world with those faces, right? Ready to love and to be loved. Curious about, this amazing space that some other humans have brought us into. And I do think it is important to start with that. The adult men that we're trying to reduce or stop or mitigate harm didn't start out there. They started out with those faces. What can we do? How can we step into this cause with deep optimism that boys and men can be connected, caring, loving human beings? And how do we put that into our prevention? Because I think it's so obvious, but if we step into a space saying, we're going to talk today about the harm that some men do, I find that men begin looking at our shoes. We begin picking up our phones. We suddenly have very important meetings we have to run into. Men don't really come into those conversations, but if I say, I believe you care about the people around you. I believe you have some issues you'd probably like to talk about because we all get better when we do. And that I believe you're a caring person until proven otherwise. Men will come, they'll look up from their shoes, and I think we see the defensiveness start to reduce. I'll stop there, and thank you for listening to me.
So Gary, actually, let's sort of start from the backwards. I mean, you really emphasized care. And now let's talk about, we loved your point about the need to seek help in caring for the emotional health of men. At the same time, there are some stereotypes, not only in Korea, but around the world, that men need to be tough. I actually heard my preschool, my son's preschool teacher telling my son, men don't cry, therefore you shouldn't cry. I mean, when they are taught right from the age of 3 like this sort of perpetuates those gender stereotypes that deter men from seeking help. So how do you address, based on your experience, those stereotypes that actually prevent men from seeking help and nurturing their emotional health?
I mean, one, I think we'll often start by, getting the attention of those who would say, we need men to be tough. That could be in the military or the workplace or the school. Let's look at global suicide rates. More than 2/3 of suicides in the world are men. In some countries, it's 80% of suicides are men. Research we've just done in the US, more than half of men ages 18 to 24 have thought about suicide in the past 2 weeks. The numbers are not much lower for young women. The difference is young men are far less likely to seek help. So I think all that is to say, it is our survival, our ability to be then tough. There are moments when we have to bear, and we need men and women to be able to stand forth in a tense moment and be strong, right? And women can do that just as much as men can. Not pretty obvious to all of us in the room. So I think it is to say it is through acknowledging hardship, needs, vulnerabilities that we actually get to be stronger humans. And by not going into the kind of the typical male approach that I will stick it out and go it alone, but actually that I can do more when I acknowledge my vulnerability and I ask for help from somebody next to me. Now that has a lot of policing to do to get teachers not to step into that, to step into the boys don't cry, tough it out. We need coaches, we need places like the military who preach, you know, this need for men to be a certain kind of manhood and to say, actually, your fighting force, when you need them to do that, is actually stronger if they know that you care for them and they're allowed to show when they can't, when they need help. So I think we have the data that it actually gets us to the end that we want. But we need boys to see adult men stop and ask for help. I think seeing celebrities, athletes, men in their own lives model that I need help is really key.
Thank you. Now the next question, also your point about education, which I really thought was a wonderful point. How can you share some examples if you have come across based on your work where the government or the community has really made the right investments in education? I'm really amazed at how much money that we actually put into the private education of our children, yet very little is often dedicated to nurturing boys and in their early age to grow up, to become humans like you described. So can you kindly share the examples of how to make those investments?
Sure. So I mentioned some examples from we developed a curriculum called Manhood 2.0. It's been used, versions of it have been used in about 35 countries. Probably in half a dozen of those, so around 5 or 6, it's actually been taken officially into the school curriculum. A few countries in Europe, a couple of countries in Latin America, and then in municipal school systems in one state in India, for example. Our impact evaluation of that finds that when you build in a critical thinking skills, because that's what it's about, getting boys and girls often together to think about where do we learn these ideas about gender? How do they harm all of us? How can we change them? Not taught as a lecture, but a conversation about our lives. How do we learn them at home, TV, peers, and how tough it is to step out of them and how we need others to be part of stepping out of them. When we carry those out in a systematized way and measure results, we see not only reductions in things like bullying or boys' use of harassment, but also boys and girls tend to do better in school because we've created a more collaborative environment in the school setting. We've taught boys in particular new ways of expressing themselves that aren't about domination. They tend to do better when they don't try to shout out or speak over the other person. And I think that's where we've fed back the results to the school system to say, you may consider these lesser skills, but actually they're both producing results that you care about or that you're held accountable for, which are how are boys doing in school. So, and they don't cost very much. In terms of, now, if you're cutting back funds and you have too many students in a classroom and your teachers are already working 55 hours a week, it's a challenge. So we do have to think about who delivers them and how they're resourced.
Thank you very much. Speaking also on the education, what do you think we can do about the sexual objectification of women online and pornography?
I think that's one of the most challenging issues that we're facing around the world. We know there's a lot of effort at the moment, and I think it's in a good way, to do at least age verification online and to police some of the production of pornographic material. But we also know that for every time we put up some kind of firewall, that boys in particular and young men will find 5 ways to get around it. So I think we have to hold those who own the technology accountable, but we also have to think about what we're doing to have these conversations. I think the most powerful voice on this topic anywhere has been young women speaking out about it. Speaking out about it at school, in their workplace, in marches, boycotting specific brands. I say that as the father of an empowered 25-year-old young woman who will, who talked about these issues and made noise in her school. I'm reluctant partly to put this on women's shoulders because you're the ones who bear the cost of what it means to get those looks and to have your bodies objectified. But I do think it is where feminist activism makes a huge difference. And I think we need to figure out how do we get at least a few young men, and there are in some places, some young men to also lend their voice to it as well, to say this is not okay. This is not the version of sex and sexuality that I want, and to step into a conversation about what does healthy sexuality look like? What does consent look like? Because I think that's the other part that has to be part of it. Often the conversations about pornography stop at just, don't watch it, it's bad, I want you not to look at it. We need to have the conversation that says sexuality is an amazing human gift. Let's talk about what consent and pleasure look like as part of that. And when you have questions that you feel like you can ask me and I will offer, and that we needs to be teachers and parents, coaches, and everyone who's in touch with young people, and to break a bit the taboo, because I know that most of us as parents would prefer not to have those conversations, but if we don't have them, we know that our sons and daughters are learning about sex from not very healthy acts.
Thank you. Now, the next question, based on your research and work, what are some of the effective ways of countering anti-women's movement? We really haven't seen the backlashes in the recent years, sometimes in a scary form. So what are some of the effective strategies of countering that?
The simple answer is we don't really know. This is, I think the extent of the backlash, the way that it's happening, so much of it's happening online, and the challenge we have of politicians who are benefiting and exacerbating it make it a really perfect, challenging storm. I think we have a lot to learn if I think about the US or my second home country of Brazil and what Korea's experiencing. I think what we have seen as what doesn't work is simply looking at young men and saying you're wrong. That you're, that just simply being alarmed by it is not enough. I think we do have to be willing to listen to what are the grievances they're bringing. Some of what we're doing some mapping online with the group Movember that does the men's mustache and men's health, to listen to the diversity of what is happening online. Some of it's backlash and pure harm. Some of it is confused young men in a world where the rules have changed, that are looking for, like, I don't know how to have a conversation with a girl. Now, if that conversation becomes, here's some respectful ways, he might go there. If he ultimately sees somebody who says, put them down, here's how to do it, here's how to treat them so that they'll do everything you want, he will follow that one if we have not offered the other side. So I think what we're trying to figure out is how do we step into there, looking at where those decision points are, and are there ways that we can recruit young men into watching other things? There are some positive influences online. They don't get nearly as much, nearly as many followers as the negative ones, but there are some. How can we look at those? There are celebrities willing to put their names out there. And ultimately, I think we have to look at some of the grievances. Let's look in, I'm listening to you about what's happening in Korea. Young men who say, I have questions about this universal military conscription. Are we willing to talk about that? Are there alternatives that could offer a national service corps, some of whom might join the military, some who might do things like be paid for 2 years to work in a child care center, and encourage men to do care work while some men may be in the military? Are we willing to listen to men's economic worries? Some of that is not just they're angry about women. Some of that is because we live in a very inequitable society where the top men are making a lot more than the rest of men. Are we willing to listen to that and put in place taxation policies and social welfare policies that acknowledge that inequality and that benefit men and women? Those are the questions that we've had trouble, right, in the women's rights space to talk about, to acknowledge that some of those grievances that men bring up are well-founded. What we want to do is to say, your blaming of women, or your blaming of immigrants, or your blaming of others is the part that's not right. But that you acknowledge there's something up in this unstable job market that's not a ridiculous grievance. So I think it's trying to step in with that degree of nuance. We have not figured that out. We're just studying it, and we'd be glad to try to learn together.
Now, let's go back specifically on the gender-based violence. Research shows that some of the perpetrators saying that I was compelled to perpetrate violence because my dignity as a man, my honor as a man were hurt. Therefore, they felt that the violence was somehow justified as a just punishment for violating their dignity. How do you engage with this discourse, and what do you think are the effective strategies of countering the conception of dignity, honor?
I think if one approach I would describe would be the bystander intervention approach. And that's where we engage other men to call out men who they hear using harmful expressions or they see using violence, because almost always that attitude doesn't fall out of the thin air when there's some issue that triggers it. We often hear our brother, a friend, a coach, a coworker use an expression like that. I'll show her if she dares question me. Those are the moments we need other men to step in and say, hey, that's not okay. Let's think about that a little bit. Why is she your property? And why is your whole identity based on how she acts? Without necessarily belittling the man. We have to do that in a way that kind of says, hey, there's something that troubles me about that. And I care about you, which is why I'm going to comment. And that we do that in ways that even sometimes put us at risk, because we know that that man can get angry at us. But I think that's one of the most effective ones, is the men who don't think that's okay need to speak up about it, because we always hear the man comment on it before he acts, almost always.
Now, the time is running short, but let me ask you this one final question. Based on your good work of many years on this topic, I'm also aware of the fact that sometimes you have received some criticisms or a bit of different perspectives on your work. It'd be great to maybe talk about what you are trying to do really through your initiative, and how this is not replacing the work of supporting survivors of gender-based violence, and but rather really tackling the root causes. And how can we also replicate initiatives like you are doing? Because you are only one person. We'd love to have you in many places, but there's only one Gary Barker. How would we also nurture more Gary Barkers and more initiatives like this?
I mean, there's a big field of engaging men as allies for gender equality. We have benefited that our work we've built an evidence base, we've communicated, we've been able to partner with amazing organizations, including with UN Women, and it's only got that, the possibility of scaling up because of those partnerships. But I do think it's important to acknowledge there is a global network that we're we're part of it, called Men Engage, that is now more than 1,000 NGOs strong around the world, of NGOs working with men and boys for gender equality. So there's a big field of practice far beyond us. And I think there has been some interaction in Korea as well with Men Engage, and I know that some organizations here have been part of that dialogue. So I think one is to say there is a big field of practice. There's a lot more out there with evidence, with data, and with approaches. And we're trying to, with that network, learn together. And the other part, I think, is just to acknowledge that accountability word. That's why we set Men Engage up, which is we believe this work with men and boys needs to be accountable to the women's rights space. It is not just about a group of us as men going over and saying, we can fix this, and we'll do this over in our space over here, but how do we do this together? And I think it's with working with a young generation of activists to say, it will be messy. There's not easy answers all the time of, are we giving too much attention to men here and taking away resources, space, voice of women over here? and how to be open and honest in those conversations, not defensive about them. And to acknowledge not all partners will always want to agree on all these points, and that's okay. It's just kind of acknowledging it's a messy, long process. It's not solved by one project, one talk, 16 days. It's as the women's rights leaders in this room know, this is decades of work.
Thank you. Now I just want to give the opportunity to say final few words, if you have any, to the audience here today.
I would go back to the point that we have been encouraged by, in spite of really challenging conditions, just how much women and the women's rights advocates here and activists here, that I think a lot are in the room, have made your voice known in very challenging moments. And I think, as someone who's done both the marching on the streets in my country, just how lonely that can feel when there's 12 of you or 15 of you or 20 of us. But just to say, we are seeing what you have done. And so kind of your tenacity in that really is empowering. And so, I'm honored to get to dialogue with some of you in that space. And I hope, in this talk and this reflection that I've been able to give something back in that. But keep empowering us, and I think I'll just end with that.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause to Mr. Dr. Gary Barker. Thank you. Now, we have actually a token of appreciation for Gary. Is this ready? Yes? Okay. Now, Dr. Lee, may I please ask you to kindly present this token of appreciation to Gary before he goes down? It says, "You're a shining star of gender equality," and we just wanted to thank you for this. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes this segment on the special lecture. Now we are going to shift our gears a little bit and then go into the first year anniversary of the Center of Excellence for Gender Equality celebration. You just being here for us is really such an honor for all of us who are working for UN Women and here at the center. And we just wanted to give you a short presentation of what we've been doing for the past year, because some of you, actually many of you, were there with us when we had the opening celebration ceremony exactly 1 year ago. So we'll just give you one quick presentation with some photos, and you will probably see your own photos in many of those photos that we show you today. And then we are going to have a celebratory reception, a networking reception afterwards. Many of you have been asking what I did to my leg. I broke my leg, tore my ligament, and this is why I have my crutch, so please excuse me for this. So we just want to give you a little bit of overview of our center, and as I said, we're going to put a little bit of highlights by thematic areas, and we'll show you some pickup photos. As you know, UN Women is the United Nations entity dedicated to gender equality, empowerment, women, and as Alia, as well as many of our speakers said, it's going to take another 286 years to remove discriminatory laws and close prevailing gaps in legal protections for women and girls, and this is why UN Women is working on gender equality. Our center was established exactly a year ago in 2022 with the support of the government of the Republic of Korea. Now, consisting of training, data research, and external relations teams, the center has taken more than 20 major events in the first year, covering the following themes: women's economic empowerment, ending violence against women, gender statistics, climate change, disaster risk reduction, humanitarian action, women and technology, and lastly, women, peace and security. Now, our center aspires to function as a knowledge and partnership hub for the Asia-Pacific region, and we have been collaborating closely with both Korean and regional stakeholders. we strive to engage in meaningful activities that can highlight the importance of gender equality and enhance the capacities of policymakers and practitioners in both public and private spheres. So for a better future of all, our Center of Excellence continue to push forward, and we really would like to have all your support in many years to come as well. Now, this is the photo. Many of you actually were here at the gathering, including the minister herself. And then after this center's opening celebration, these are some of the activities that we've been implementing. I'm not going to read them all, but there are more than 20 activities that we've been doing based on a couple of the themes. Now, in total, the center has provided, engaged with more than 1,868 individuals coming from 32 countries in 2023. And then we had almost 400 people that we engaged for the training activities, more than 300 from the research and data activities, and more than 1,000 from the external relations activities. And over 80% of our participants were women. And this is 32 countries in total that we've been engaging with. So while we are located here in the Republic of Korea, our audience and our partners are much greater than the country. Now, in terms of center's work by themes, you may wonder what we are really doing. So the center on the women's economic empowerment, we've been doing various engagements with the private sector in particular, promoting women's empowerment principles. So we organized Women's Empowerment Principles workshop, and then we hosted a gender equality dialogue, really focusing on the underrepresented industries. And many of you who are here today actually have attended. And then we've been organizing various policy forums, including latest one on the gender pay gap. Now, on ending violence against women, we have provided regional trainings on various topics, including engaging with youth to address technology-facilitated gender-based violence. And there has been a lot of cross-country exchange and learning, because the best practices and inspirations really come from your peers. On the climate change and humanitarian action and disaster risk reduction, we have also conducted various training workshops. And then we brought various practitioners from the region to share their experiences on how to really embody the gender perspective in climate change response, which is a very new area of work. On women and technology, this was the theme of the Commission on the Status of Women in this year. So we've been working on statistical work on women and technology in terms of developing indicators, and we also share the conclusions of the CSW with the Korean stakeholders, and also held a second policy forum on exploring the nexus between climate change and technology. On women, peace and security, we have hosted, together with the Ministry of National Defense and the PKO Center of the Republic of Korea, to provide their training to women military officers from almost 20 countries. And we also hosted Korea's peacekeeping forum with men and women talking about the importance of promoting women's participation in peacekeeping. On gender statistics, we have conducted various training, both online and offline, to really nurture the capacities of the policymakers who are doing the statistical work, but who are also utilizing those statistics that are generated. And we have partnered with the Statistical Commission of the Republic of Korea. And then we have also organized an international conference on femicide as well, to really strengthen the statistical framework on femicide. And also on public outreach, many of you were here at our International Women's Day celebration. And we have also participated in various workshops and conferences that our partners and stakeholders have organized. And we will continue to do so in terms of our work with our partners, because we cannot do this work alone, but we will do so in close partnership with all of you who are gathered here. So once again, thank you very much, because all the work that we've done for the past year was made only possible because you were there for us right from the beginning, and we sincerely thank you. We have Ambassador Raper here from Australia who spoke at our opening, and then many of ambassadors who are here and many of the experts and practitioners. You have really helped us to achieve those activities together, and then please help us and support us in the many years to come, and we thank you very much for your kind attention and support. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the formal event of today. And now we are going to move to the networking reception. Some delicious food is actually waiting for you. But before we go to the networking reception, and please do not miss on good food. We have prepared a lot of food, enough for you. I actually just wanted to invite Carolyn, who is the acting country representative from Vietnam, UN Women Viet Nam office, who have traveled afar to celebrate, to kindly give us a small toast speech on behalf.
Allow me to observe all protocol. Ladies and gentlemen, a heartfelt congratulations to the UN Women Center of Excellence in Seoul, Republic of Korea, on the celebration of its first year anniversary. Today, we from Vietnam, a beneficiary country of the expert work that has been done through this center, would really like to acknowledge the tremendous impact that this center has had in shaping the capacities for accelerating the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and leaving no one behind across the Asia-Pacific region. In the past year, our dedicated teams, including my own team from Vietnam, within UN Women, have come to the center alongside government officials, civil society organizations, and various partners, as we witnessed in the presentation just made. And we have all benefited from well-tailored technical programs by the center. So on behalf of over 1,868 individuals from across 32 countries who have benefited from the center's expertise, I extend our greatest gratitude to you, Dr. Lee, and the team. So join me in raising a toast. I think there's a glass close to where you are. So please do hold up your glass. Maybe we could actually stand. Yes, we could actually stand. So here's to the UN Women Center of Excellence in Seoul, a catalyst for change, and to many more years of impactful collaborations and transformative initiatives with even greater achievements and continued strides towards a future where gender equality is not just a word we talk about, but is reality. To excellence, to expertise, to empowerment. Cheers. So while I still have the floor, allow me to invite my colleague Jeongshim to receive a special gift that was made with love by the women of Vietnam.
Thank you so much, Caroline. So distinguished guests, this is the end of our program. So please enjoy good food and good company. And thank you so much, and see you in our next activity. Thank you.